All right, what's up, everyone? Shane, aka Wild Poker here, coming back at you with another PO study session from some hands I played at 510. These hands are pretty old, but definitely some interesting spots, and I think a good opportunity for everybody to study. And wanted to let you guys know this will be the last one in the 510 PO series that I've been slowly putting out on YouTube for a while. Last month we got crushed at the tables. Just tried to push myself way too hard for a a rake race. I was playing way too long sessions, not taking any breaks, day after day, playing day after day. And I'm sure by the end of the month, or even in the beginning of the month, throughout the whole time, I was just playing not good poker. And I also, on top of that, ran really, really bad last month. So two worst possible things that can happen: playing bad, running bad at the same time, and we got pretty crushed last month. So because of that, I'm not playing 510 for a while, but I'm trying to get myself back up there as quickly as possible. And once I do, we'll start kicking out some more of these review videos. But for now, this will be the last one. And the other videos we'll do some of the Twitch study sessions. I'll edit those and post those up every once in a while. And then also try to get some more live play videos out for you from some of my Twitch sessions as well. So if you guys like those will be coming out more often. Okay, so the first hand we're gonna start it covered, and what I would really encourage you guys to do is spend a lot of time and break down your ranges in each of these spots. And if you really want to get crazy, do it from both players' perspectives. Break down your ranges in each of these spots with the line that was taken. Maybe if you want to add in some other bet sizes and stuff like that and really go in depth. Take your time, break up down all the ranges, and then we'll pull up, then continue and we'll pull up the PIO, and you can see how you compare it. It'll be a really good check for you to see how your ranges are in a spot like this. And I'll give you guys an example of a couple different ways that you can do it. The one that I prefer is Card Winners EV, and we'll go through this as we go through the PIO, so I can kind of show you how it all breaks down. But the real reason I like Card Winners EV is if you break out all your different combos like this, you can see what percent of your total range that makes up for each of the different categories. You can lock it to you can get in here and customize things like this. You can go through. One thing I did over here was you can actually put in a range, and when you put in the range, you can lock out certain suits and stuff. So you can really fine tune the ranges that you're messing around with and get it exact as you want to be. So if you weren't willing to put in the time and the effort, you could really come out with some perfect ranges on your own, just going through Card Winners EV and breaking everything down. Here I did a much quicker version, not as fine tuned, just as an example. I think this will take a while if you're going to do this. So this is obviously not something you can do with every single hand, every single study session, or this will just eat up your entire study session. But I do think that when you're getting into some common spots, button versus small blind, button versus big blind, small blind versus big blind, big blind versus button, and a 3-bet pot type stuff, those spots that happen very often, I do think that every once in a while it'll be very good for you to just kind of check yourself and go through this and then go through PIO. And it's just adding in that extra layer of study and really reinforcing your strategies, or really highlighting some leaks that you might have in some of your strategies as well. So as we go through the PIO sim, we'll go through it like this. I'll show you this first, and then we'll see PIO, and we'll see kind of how I compared, and I'll talk about each of the actions and explain maybe a little bit of how I set this up as we go. So I do think Card Winners EV is definitely hands down the best way to do this check, and probably even though it takes a while, it's probably the most efficient, more efficient than like doing it by hand and counting all the combos. And there's other programs out there where you can do it, but you can't get as accurate. So this is one of the other options that you can have, and will kind of show you here. So let's say this is Flopzilla, made by the same guy that made Card Winners EV. And what you can do is you can have a range here, and you can see that. So first, let's take this off. You can see that our range on the flop, it shows here, what percent of our range is each hand, and you can kind of really see a nice breakdown. But something that maybe not a lot of people know about is you have these icons here on the side This is a filter, and so you could do a street by street filter for what's betting and what's checking. So we have, let's say we're betting all this stuff here. We click the filter, and now it shows us what we're betting to go to the turn. And then when we add in the turn, we see the percent of hands that we have for each category. We can set up a brand new filter. We can change these as much as we want. It won't affect the previous filter. And we can click that, and now we can have the range of hands that we're getting to the ripper with. And that's another kind of quick, easy way that you could do that. It's a little, well, actually, I haven't really tried to go down and see if you can mess around with filters and doing suit selection and things like that. There's some Flopzilla masters out there that are much better than me at using this program, and they might have tricks that they do that can do that. But I've only used it in the simple forms of just these basic filters here, setting it up real quick. But it's still a good starting point. Definitely better than not doing anything. So right now, guys, I would definitely recommend, if you have one of those programs, start breaking down your ranges for one or both of the players for these bet sizings or multiple bet sizings, as in-depth as you want to go, using Card Runners EV if you can, using Flopzilla if you can, or even if you don't have either of those and don't want to buy those, then I would take some time, do it by hand, and I promise, guys, this will help you a lot in the long run, rather than just looking at the pile that we're going to pull up here in a second. So right now, guys, pause the video and unpause it once you've got all that done, and we'll get into the next step. Okay, so now that you guys have seen the hand, the next thing we'll do is we'll pull up PIO and look at the flop. And as you can see, well, first thing I want to show you in the Card Runners EV, I'm saying that I'm going to bet 100% of my range. I just have this broken down here, set, two pair, over pair, all that, so I can see, get a good idea of how strong my range is on this board, how many really strong hands we have. And you can see that, 15%, 20, so we have 37% of our hands that are pretty darn decent in a heads-up pot, which would be the one pair, mid-pair range, and then another 4 or 5. So 40% of our hands, a high percent of our hands are actually pretty darn good on this board. And then a lot of that stuff below that, gut shots, backdoors, open-ended, flush draws, these are all pretty darn high equity hands as well. These two down here being the weakest. So, but really only about 22% of our hands has very, very low equity here. And even some of the hands that are going to show up in this range are still going to be doing okay versus a lot of things in his current range here when we get to the flop. So it definitely gives you a good opportunity to just kind of break down and see how your range is fitting out on a board like this. And for the out of position player, I didn't try to mess around with his ranges at all. We just gave him all hands. I didn't touch it. Like I said, this one's just an example, so I'm not going as in-depth and as in detail as you could. But if you did want to take the time for both players and really guess each player's ranges, you could actually get very accurate numbers here for the EV of betting or checking and things like that, and really break it down that way. Okay, so first here, thing I wanted to say about the player that we're playing against here, Scooby doesn't play on GG Poker anymore unless he changes the account name or something, but was at the time definitely the best player on the site, I would think. Not a player that I would look to play long sessions heads up. We were basically playing a couple hands heads up after the table broke and kind of hoping that more players came back, but very, very, very good player. For us opening on the button, I have a 75% range almost. I think most heads up professionals these days are actually going to be shooting for 80% or even a little bit higher than that. But me probably being at a little bit of a skill disadvantage for Scooby, tighten up a little bit, cut out some of these connector hands, the weakest queens, things like that. And I'm actually not even 100% certain what the actual ranges of heads-up players are playing these days, but I do know that it's going to be a very, very high percent, much higher than in a 6-max game, because once it gets to heads-up, you're actually getting a discount on your open, so you're able to open much wider than a normal 6-max button range. And for him out of position, this was mostly a range that was actually already built into PIO, heads up small blind call. But what I did do is all these 60% hands that were here actually were set at 100% 3-bet, which I just don't think is happening. So I just added in a much higher frequency of these hands to be in there. All of these hands that were 1% or 5% were 100% 3-bets for his range, and so I just went in and added those a little bit, because I think that some of the time he might decide to slow play to have some really strong hands in his flop range. But I do think that a very high frequency of the time he's just going to be 3-betting and playing it that way. So we changed the range a little bit, but not too drastically. I think this is the most drastic change here, but not really going to affect it too much on the board that we have here, other than giving him some more 6x. So for us, I just used the sizing that we used at 40%. When we get to the turn, I gave a 2/3 and an overbet, and then on the river, I gave a 2/3 or an all-in. And I'm allowing us, let's say he check raises and bets the turn, I'm allowing us to shove, so we can punish him some of the time with a shove, or we can make a smaller raise. And then on the river, we have this all-in box checked here. So the bet size, it'll add an all-in to the bet size, and it'll also add an all-in to the raise if need be. So we've got that covered. He's always going to check to us. He check raised 4x in this hand, so we just left it there. Here, you're seeing him having the option to do multiple different things. Again, he can check raise all in here. And on the river, we have the all-in check, so he can bet all in or check raise all in, or donk all in, I guess. So that's how I set it up. We're not going to actually review this one. I just wanted to show you guys this. This is kind of like the PIO, I don't know, as good as it's going to get. We could give ourselves a bunch of different bet sizing options on the flop. We could give him a bunch of donk bet sizing options on the flop, and maybe that'll be a little more accurate. But I think this is close enough for now. And I wanted to compare this to the strategy that I was going to be using. And we're actually going to be using the strategy that I would have used in the hand and analyzed PIO that way. And that would be with a 100% c-bet. So here you can see that PIO is actually c-betting 64% of the time, checking back 36% of the time. And the things that I wanted to check here are, what is our EV difference? Okay, so when you check the EV difference here, we're losing 0.4 EV from going from a PIO optimized c-bet strategy to a 100% c-bet strategy. And I did the math here. The pot at the time before we bet is 50, and we're losing 0.4, so we're losing 0.008 of the pot, which when you multiply by 100 you get the percent. We're losing 0.8% of the pot, so almost 1%, which I do think is somewhat significant and definitely could be a concern if the player is going to start playing perfectly against our adjusted strategy. So the next thing we need to check is, so once we do c-bet optimized versus the 100%, what does he have to do? What does he have to change in order to punish us for that difference? And you can see that the first thing that's happening is he's going from a 7% check raise to a 17% check raise. So he's now forced to check raise a lot of his weaker queen X, a lot more of the flush draws and stuff in this range, a lot more of the broadways, the king queens and stuff like that. Keep in mind he does a very small frequency of these hands. So the majority of the check raise are coming, the increased check raise frequency is coming from this stuff over here, and then this stuff down here, the queens here, and some of these hands. Increasing the check raise frequency of this doesn't change much, hardly at all. So he's forced to, one, check raise us a bunch on a board texture, which is definitely much better for our range as far as the nut advantage. The other thing is looking at some of the hands that he's forced to call with. He's actually not forced to call all that much more between the 100 and the 60%. But even when you look at, let's just go to the screen nice and big here so we can see it pretty easy. He's forced to defend with all of these king eights that can have the backdoor flush draw of the 8 or the king. I think this is one that's going to be somewhat difficult to defend for a lot of people. It's got a couple backdoor straight draws as well. All these king 7s, similar situation. forced to defend with some of these king fives here. And I think these are hands that a lot of people are just going to find auto folds with, and also have a difficult time finding some of these check raises with at this high of a frequency. And we could go through this whole thing and find a bunch of other spots that are going to be really hard for people to defend, or spots that people aren't defending in your current population pool. And basically what that means is that I think that this negative, the difference, this negative 0.4 difference from going the PO optimal to this 100% is going to be made up by our out of position player just not being able to defend as aggressively and as wide as PIO would be able to. So going to stick with the 100% here. Okay, so we bet here, and he's going to check raise his wide range. And before we do that, let's pull up our card runs EV and see what we're continuing with. And so here, I did put out some raising range. I said for me, I would only want to be raising with jacks. And one of the main reasons I did this is because I wanted to also, I'm focusing on this call line here, but this is a good way to get rid of some of the hands that we're raising so the frequencies are closer to what I would be trying to do down here. So I do think that PIO is going to be 3-betting all of the sets at some frequency, but rather than mess around with some mixed strategies, I just decided that jacks would be the best re-raise for me. Reason being is jacks unblock all of his queen X hands that are check raising, so a lot of check raises that we're gonna have to call against us are re-raising range, and we're getting good value there. It also unblocks his sixes, which is the one hand that's going to build a giant pot with us. And so if we're 3-betting those sixes, we cut out that the strongest hand in his range that can build a giant pot for us. That's going to show up at a decently high frequency. So, I stuck with just jacks. But again, I assume PIO would be doing some mixing of all of them. Two pairs. I thought a lot of our two pairs would just want to call. Reason being is, although you see PIO check raising a frequency of 16%, I'm guessing most players are going to check raise less than that. And the range is actually going to be, even still have a hard time being really strong, and it's going to be somewhat bluff heavy. So it could be easily bluff heavy. I guess if people are betting balanced ranges, that's not the case. But if it is ending up being a little bit bluff heavy, when we start check raising, all of these two pairs that block actually a lot of his queen X or weaker two pair hands that are able to continue, and a lot of his range that can continue, then one, we're not giving the opportunity to continue to bluff us on later streets, and two, we're just maybe even value owning ourselves versus the part of his range that could continue, because it's going to end up being like sets, or let's say with jack six, it's going to end up, you can still be queen jack some of the time, and kind of hurt us. So I kind of thought that we would want to be doing mostly calling on this board. You could say only have us re-raising 4%. Yeah, so I just weighted this down really, really low. All these things that are 50% here, I actually think are going to be mixed at some frequency, but don't really know what it's going to be. So I just put 50% here, and we'll see how PIO compares to this. So this would be our overpairs are probably weakest value raise that's going to be done at any kind of frequency was ace queen, in my opinion. I think king queen is actually getting just way too weak here to re-raise at this point. So I have that in there. These are going to be maybe some high frequency bluffs. All the suits are in here, having the nut straight draw potential with either the king or the 10 coming in for us, and then also having some backdoor flushes and things like that we can continue to bluff as well. I didn't want to be re-raising with a lot of the ace-high flush draws, because I figured that ace-high flush draws and king-high flush draws would be actually a pretty big portion of his bluffing range. And so blocking that, we're actually making his range more weighted towards value hands. So I do think that we're going to want to be able to have some potential to make a nut flush draw or a second nut flush draw or some strong flushes if we are re-raising. So I wanted to have them in there some of the time, but I didn't want to get too crazy with it. And similarly with the flush draws. And if you guys watch my stream, you actually see that I don't get crazy very often with, check raising my flush draws all the time or re-raising my flush draws all the time. We do a lot of calling, both in position and out of position with these, and it's important to make sure that you are doing a lot of calling with them and making sure you're not over-raising them, because you want to be able to have them in both lines. So anyways, calling here. This was just taking out third pair, middle kicker. So what I thought here was some of our weakest 6x might be used as a rebluff, and I didn't want to have all the 6x in there because some of them are probably strong enough to just call. So this was just used to get rid of the stronger ones. And I said maybe some small percent of the time we could decide to re-raise some of our weakest 6x, have kind of a really weak bluff hand in there, but also a hand that has a good blocker versus his strongest value check raise. So anyways, this is kind of the range that I came up with, something like this. And then for the calling, we're basically calling with any pair 6s or better, all of our flush draws, any of the gut shots here. And I actually think that 9/8, if it doesn't have a backdoor flush draw, would probably fold, would be my guess. But I didn't want to spend the time to get like that specific with it, so I just left them all in there. Maybe we would be continuing with our backdoor nut flush draws. However, I'm not so sure about this one, but we'll see. We'll check that in PIO. And then any of our hands that have a pair and a backdoor flush draw would continue. So I was continuing with about 55%, and then we're folding, all this junk out here. And so that is on the flop versus his range. So keep that in mind. Hopefully you guys have your ranges also in mind as well. So yeah, we bet, he check raises, and we're going to kind of see here. So we got somewhat close here with a pretty much never re-raising. I had us calling 55% of the time. PIO was only calling here 48% of the time, so we're defending too wide, which I think we're going to see that the problem is the backdoor flush draws here, just never calling. Obviously, if we have so we can start defending a 7 backdoor flush draw or better, but we're not supposed to be calling with these. The pair plus backdoor flush draws are calling. So where else was I a little bit off with the calling range? We're folding actually a bunch of the 6x. And pretty much never bluffing it. So, well, we have some small frequencies of bluffs, but mostly just folding all this stuff that doesn't have a heart. This is a suited combo. Let's go here. So yeah, we really want some kind of heart to continue with that pair. So the pair plus backdoor flush draw. But we're folding a lot of these 6x, and I had all those in there. So that's definitely our biggest problem right there. That would make up for this calling range. So I would have been defending, if I was defending that range, I would have been defending too wide. The other thing you can see here is that hands like pocket 7s, pocket 8s, even pocket 9s. So pocket 9s we can defend a little bit if we don't have the backdoor flush draw, but 8s and 7s need to be folding. So that's another mistake that I was making there. I probably would have been defending a little bit too wide with some of these pairs. The other thing is when you look at the re-raising range and how it's kind of broken up, I think, one, I would have been re-raising with aces, kings, ace, queen too much. And I do have these here at 50% for those part, but like I said, I'm sure it was just randomized. I didn't actually think it was 50%, but I still think that I probably would have at least been at like 30% or 40%. So I would have been betting these too much. It would have been a problem. Let's look at the 2-pair combos. So these ones are actually, I had those at 5%, and this is looking closer to 10. So let's see, where's the Jack 6? There it is. So that one's never done. And queen 6. So yeah, and the other thing is, like, a little bit of what I was talking about is, you know, some of the 2 pairs here, these weaker ones are actually going to run into a problem with getting dominated by his strongest and most frequent 2-pair check raisers, Queen Jack, and then also hurt the fact that we're actually blocking a lot of his other weaker continues that and unblocking a lot of his bluffs, so he can basically just kind of easily fold a bunch of the range, or, you know, not continue call and not continue to bluff unless he improved or something like that. So definitely want to be doing a lot more calling here with these hands. Even though I even had it at 5%, these hands are pretty much 0. So although my percentage was close, I think the way that it was made up was definitely off, which is good to check. I was, I think, pretty on about the fact that our ace-high flush draws want to be re-raising at a very low frequency. So our king-high flush draws are pretty much the same as the ace-highs. I would have been definitely raising the king-high flush draws too much. And I would have been raising a lot of these flush draws out here too much. You can see that calling is basically the main thing that we're doing here. The flush draws that are raising the most are the ones that have a queen. Okay, so that is the flop. We'll move on to the turn now. So we called, and the turn was the 10 of diamonds. And I don't know if you guys, just in case you guys did the ranges on your own, we'll take a second to look at this for the out of position player, if you guys actually took the time to build that range as well. The option here, 1/3 barrel, is by far the best choice if he is going to barrel. But the 10 is such a good card for our range because he can almost never have ace-king. And also, yeah, because he can almost never have ace-king. He does have king-9 at a very high frequency, and he still does have 2 pairs and 8-9. But us being able to have the nuts and him not being able to have the nuts is kind of a problem for us, which means that if he is going to bet, we need to really keep it at the small sizing. Really checking a lot. So what is he preferring to bet? Kings at a really high frequency to match with his king-9 and to block our ace-king, and 9s at a really high frequency to match his king-9 and his 8-9, and also to block the king-9s that are in our range. Let's keep in mind that obviously this is his real range looks like this, where there's much less of like some of these cards that we're seeing out here. So he's not getting to the turn with a bunch of these weak 9s. Yeah, so that's very important to note, and basically the ones that he is getting here with are like the flush draws. And again, a lot of the kings out here that he's getting there with. So blocking effects are really important. So we're going to keep this in mind, but he mostly wants to be checking, which makes a lot of sense based on that ace-king thing. So let's, once he checks, once it gets to us on the turn, let's put the 10 of diamonds in here. So I only did for us betting the overbet sizing. I didn't mess around with other bet sizings, which we could have used, as we'll see here in a second in PIO. So what hands am I overbetting? I said I'm going to want to mix some of my straights into overbet, and maybe some into the smaller bet sizing. Sets, you know, doing some mixing. Not really sure about the frequencies for here, so I just put 50%. When we get into this 2-pair and overpair range, I'm not as excited about betting these for value at the bigger sizing because we have so many stronger hands that we can be betting. But I still think that these are doing okay against his range, and so might be betting some of the time once he checks to us specifically. And so we have those in there. Wanting to be betting a lot of our nut flush draw potential. And I think we're going to be focusing similar to what he was doing with his betting strategy. Once he checks to us, our bluffing strategy is going to be very similar. We're going to really try to put a lot of the focus on the king X and the 9X portion of our range, blocking the potential king 9 and 8-9 parts of his range. So I have the nut flush draws actually checking back quite a bit more, but the ace-9 would probably be 100%. But then you can see when we get to the king highs, I have us betting them way more. And I think that makes a little bit more sense. I think having the having that king blocker is much more valuable than having the ace blocker. And here, I have us just betting any of the 9x that gets to the turn, which is basically the 9x that had 6, and then the flush draws. And then I have us betting some frequency with all of our flush draws. Probably the queen high flush draws, and the 9-10 flush draw. And even the 8 high flush draws blocking 8-9 are probably going to be bet at a much higher frequency than the rest of them, but I just kind of lumped them all in here and put it at 50%. And this has us betting only 15% of the time for the overbet sizing. So let's see if that's right or wrong, and hopefully you guys got yourselves ready to check this out. So he checks to us, and we're actually betting too much for the overbet sizing. So we should have tuned it down just a little bit. So let's see where we're making our mistake. So the first thing to note is that aces, kings, queen, jack, sets, none of those are bet anywhere near 50% of the time. Ace king is the closest one. Yeah, what about king 9 here? King 9 isn't even bet 50% of the time. So our really strong hands are actually betting, we have them betting too much. But we can see that a lot of the king X here, except for king 6, can be bet big at a very, very high percent. So we got pretty close there. We were off with our ace high flush draws. The majority of them are almost never betting. Let's do this so we can see, because it looks like we're getting to the turn with a bunch of non-flush draws here. But you can see that very, very, very rarely betting. I guess 5% would have been a much closer number. The ace 9 was one. The ace 9 of hearts was one that I said could be bet almost 100% of the time. It was kind of close there. And we really like betting the king X, the kings though. This is interesting to me though, because it looks to me like we're bluffing a lot and not really trying to value bet with the straights. Like we're bluffing the straights a ton here, but not trying to value bet with them as aggressively. So that's kind of interesting. I also had a lot of these flush draws out here, betting some percent of the time. Like I said, like the 9x flush draws would probably be betting big the majority of the time, and as we can see here, that's not the case. And similarly, a lot of our flush draws there are choosing to bet 2/3 is the sizing I gave us here. 2/3. So the ones that want to bet big are pretty much just occasionally we could throw in the over pairs and the 2 pairs and things like that in the sets, but really want to focus more on the nut straight and the second nut straight, and then put in our bluffs are going to come from the really strong blockers and high equity bluffs that we have in our range here, the vast majority of those. So hopefully you guys all kind of lined up a little bit with that. If you put out your ranges, I don't see anything in here that's like really surprising me, other than, that we were just a little bit off with some of our assumptions here. So this is going to throw us off because we were a little bit off here and a little bit off here. We're going to be quite a bit off here, I'm guessing, when we get to the river. But that's good. That's good to check this, that we're looking at these differences. So we do the overbet. He should be folding the vast majority of his range here. 67% of the time he should be folding. But he ends up calling. And the river, so the river's 5 of diamonds. Pretty much never donking. We can see ranges are getting very, very thin at this point. He's only got 20.5 combos here pretty much that are checking to us. And once he checks to us on the 5, let's go back up here in a card runner's EV. And I said our value range here at the weakest was going to be a set for the all-in, and then the straights as well. And that gave us about a 34% value range, and we have us bluffing basically anything with a king, 9, or 8 should be bluffing at a pretty high frequency. And so we ended up with 27% bluffs. It has us betting 62% of our range on the river, and checking 38%. And I think this number is just going to end up being too high because we were betting too much of this stuff here, and continuing with actually too much of it here on the flop. So let's see what PIO says. So he checks, and we are actually able to get up to 45%. So I mean, we're definitely doing a ton of betting for the overbet sizing. I'm actually pretty darn happy with the range that I put in here on the river in the card runners EV. I mean, obviously we're value betting our straights. That's given. Pocket. So you can see that kings is getting turned into a bluff here. The nice thing about this also is if he does bluff catch with king queen, we got him. King 9. Are we betting the sets? We are. Jacks. Queens is checking. And I think the problem with the queens is, I think the main problem with the queens is that it's probably telling us here that his bluff catch, one of his biggest bluff catch is king queen. And so when we have queens in our range, that going for the all-in, really blocking that big bluff catch is a problem. It also means that he's going to have a lot higher frequency of the king 9 and the 8-9 and stuff like that in his range. And it's also going to block, not only is it blocking the king queen, but it's also blocking queen jack, queen 10, queen 9 combos and stuff like that, some of those other bluff catches as well. So queens is not a good value jam, but jacks and 6s definitely gets much better. Choosing to use a smaller sizing for the 10s here as well. So I probably would have been over, I definitely would have shoved the queens, and that would have been a mistake. We can see here it's actually a pretty significant mistake. So this I think would be the biggest mistake that I would have made in the hand here. 10s, if I had 10s, you can see the EV differences here aren't that huge, much less than the difference between betting smaller here and jamming all in. Probably would have jammed the 10s. So we would have been making a slight mistake with that as well. But the thing that I'm excited about here is that I was pretty on with bluffing all of our king X here, putting in a lot of bluffs with our 9X unless we have the pair, and even going pretty crazy with some of our 8X. Again, we're getting here with very low frequency of these hands. And we also, if we do get to the river with, I guess mostly just checking back and giving up with these, with the heart miss flush draws, because it's only going to miss flush draws. So yeah, pulling our bluffs from those hands. And we're also, yeah, these are all check backs here. We could occasionally jam with the ace-8, and the ace-7 would be bad. The ace-8 is okay because it blocks 8-9 a little bit, so it's a little bit better to jam here, but not so good in that we block all of his ace-high flush draws and some of the 8x flush draws that are just easy folds, miss flush draws, sorry. So that does end up being a problem. But I think if you guys have been watching my PIO videos or been studying PIO on your own, you know that PIO very infrequently is going to be bluffing these miss nut flush draws when it gets to the river. So anyways, we are choosing to turn, again, we're getting, let's just not look at these, because let's look at it this way, because that's very, very infrequent. Okay, so yeah, I think on the river we were actually pretty darn close with our bluffing range. I was off with my value range. I would have been making a significant mistake with the queens, and it makes sense now that I've said it out loud and talked about it a little bit here looking through PIO, why the queens is not as good as some of the other sets. And the other mistake I probably would have never considered turning kings into a bluff. So we do want to be turning our kings into a bluff here. We can see it at a decent frequency. So we jam, and just in case you guys have your had your card runners, or not your card runners EV, but your ranges for both players set up, we'll take a look at this for you. And versus the jam, let's do it this way. His biggest bluff catch, queen jack, queen 10. Again, this is why I was saying that we probably don't want to be jamming the queens. This is because we're blocking a lot of these bluff catches that we could be beating. king queen is wanting to bluff catch at a pretty high frequency. If he gets here this way with it, yeah, pretty much never gonna have queens, but he has those. Even going down into occasionally blocking with or bluff catching with queen 5, very rarely, but occasionally needing to. I think against most players who maybe aren't going to be getting to the river with as much bluffs as PIO or bluffing all of them effectively, we could just pretty much easily exploitively fold all this stuff and keep it to like king queen, you know, and the really strong 2 pairs here, blocking the sets and stuff as well. And then 8-9. So I think this is kind of an easy range to get to. Probably the toughest calls to make here. Ace queen is roughly about the same as king queen. Blocks a little less straights because it doesn't block king 9 anymore, but pretty close. Which is why you can see the ace queen off here folding a higher percent than the ace queen suited. All right, so I don't think there's probably too much more to go over with that hand, but hopefully that gave you guys a good example of an exercise that you can do when you're using PIO that would definitely double check your ranges and really just reinforce, like I said, reinforce your strategy that you think you would have taken at the time, or find some big leaks for you. Main takeaways real quick that I'll summarize from this hand is, 1, we saw that, you know, when we had this big range advantage here, that c-betting 100% frequency is likely going to be at least the same EV as, you know, checking back some of our weaker hands, or a balanced check back range between a betting range, until we play against a perfect player who's going to be defending, you know, very aggressively like PIO would. So that was one of the takeaways. The next takeaway here was, on this kind of a board texture when we're getting check raised, backdoor flush draws just have no value here unless they have some sort of pair or something to go along with it, or a backdoor flush draw and backdoor straight draws, things like that. So I was definitely over defending here on the flops with too many backdoors, and that's definitely a problem. I'm going to skip through these here. On the turn, the main takeaway was I was betting at too high of a frequency with overpairs, sets, and 2 pairs, and also even a little bit too high of a frequency with some of the straights. So probably need to tone down some of those frequencies, be able to get to the river after we check back a little more often with some pretty nutted hands. So need to keep that in mind. And definitely make sure that our big bets have some really strong blocker effects, as well as some nice backdoor equity and things like that. Because although it's, you know, it's all flush draws here with a king and then the 9, we're gonna have some of the backdoors and things like that, but really focusing on the flush draws, blocking his straight draws. So really important to have those blocker effects. And on the river, the biggest takeaway was really be aware of, when you're value betting a hand, how it affects what their calling range is going to look like. Again, betting the queens here would have been a massive mistake, because now we're blocking the king queen, the ace queen, the queen jack, the queen 10, and we're unblocking king 9 and 8-9, which are his strongest hands that are always going to call. So again, keep in mind that, you know, how the blocker effects of the hands you're trying to value bet, even though it feels like a really strong hand. And queens is a really strong hand that's ahead of a lot of his range, but once we put in that really big bet, we force his calling range to be much stronger than our value betting range because of those blocker effects. So that's the last takeaway from the hand, all summed up. And with that, we will quickly show you guys the results of the hand, because I'm sure you're dying to see it. So in this hand, I had ace-8 here, and we could see that the ace-8 was definitely an overbet on the turn, which I did good with it, and very, very, very rarely could jam on the river here. So I'm not hating the shove, but we definitely have a lot of better bluffs in our range, as we saw. He ended up tanking to the very, very last second of his time bank before making the king-queen call. And yeah, not much to say about this hand, but other than a nice $4,000 pot going the wrong way. Kind of a bummer there. Okay, so let's get into the next hand. The next hand, we're not going to go as in-depth and do blocking the cards. And if you guys do want to pause it and go through your ranges and stuff before you get to the next part, absolutely do that. I think that would be a good practice for you again to do. But this time we're just going to show the hand, break it down as quickly as possible and just have one more hand to go through. So here, again, another hand against Scooby. Decided here on the flop that I was going to be checking the vast majority of my range, and I think on this kind of a board texture, small blind versus big blind, that's going to be a pretty darn good strategy. We have seen on a lot of my earlier videos that I was actually taking 100% range checks out of position on boards where I should have been c-betting quite a bit. So we do need to be careful about what boards we're picking to check range out of position. But I do think that this is one that's definitely going to fit into a high frequency check. When he bets, I think this specific combo of the aces is almost always going to be a call, maybe very rarely check raising. Having a heart, I think we could be a little more likely to check raise. I'm going to be doing a lot of check calling here and also a lot of check raising. I think on this board texture though, I'm going to be a little bit less likely to check raise at a huge high frequency like I would on maybe some queen high boards or some jack high boards or things like that. Reason being is there's a lot of the offsuit, 4-5 type hands, 5-8 type hands, a lot of those offsuit combos that aren't in my range, which means that he actually has a lot more potentially really strong hand combos in his range with 2 pairs, straights, things like that. So we do have to be pretty careful on this board. Pretty easy check call on the turn, I think, with our hand. And on the river, when he checks, and when he bets pot, I'm not so sure we ever want to just bluff catch with this hand. It is going to be pretty close though, I think. I'm guessing probably bluff catching and check jamming are going to be somewhat close, but I decided to go for the check shove and turn our hand into a bluff, having the nut blocker, and recognizing that I know my strategy is going to be to check call here with a decent amount of backdoor flush draws that have the ace high especially, and check call the turn again with all those turn flush draws, and then when we get to the river, I'm going to be check jamming those. So having the ace of diamonds in my hand, I'm basically taking the same line I think that I would have taken when I had all those flush draws. So decided to turn this one into a bluff here, and we're going to go ahead and check this one out in PIO and see how well we played it. Okay, so first, as I always do, we'll show the ranges. This range I just actually took from small blind steel, and I think it's reasonable. I would actually want him to be playing somewhat tight again against Scooby because I think he's a player that actually has an edge on me, and especially when we're going to be out of position throughout the hand. I'm going to be playing pretty tight here. So, maybe I might occasionally open the jack 9, but I'm folding my weakest queen X suited. I'm definitely folding a lot of this stuff in here. So you can see even our suited combos of some of the hands that are making 2 pairs and nice straight draws and things like that are missing, which is another big problem for us, and definitely missing all the offsuit combos. So that's definitely a concern on this board for us. And I used the standard. This range was again built by PIO, big blind call versus small blind, and just left it as it is. Didn't mess around with that one. All that's put in there. For us, out of position, I have our c-bet. We can either c-bet 1/3 or check. This one I didn't do a 100% checking strategy. I just left it at this. But I think you guys will see once we see the flop and things like that, and having looked at a lot of the other hands where we're doing 100% bet or 100% check strategies on other reviews that I've done, you guys kind of have a good idea of how that might change. Turn, we could block bet or overbet. I think we might have made a small mistake here by not giving us a 2/3 option, but I didn't worry about it too much on this board texture because I figured that a lot of our strategy would be actually somewhat polarized, meaning that when we are betting, big bets feel pretty good, or just really trying to protect our equity in the hand, but also just doing a ton of checking. So I kept, I think limiting our options here might hurt a little bit, but I think on this board texture, it's actually not going to be that big of a deal. And on the river, we have a really small bet or going all in. Similar for the check raises, we can check raise all in here. And for him, I just kind of used the sizings that he could have used, 2/3, overbet, pot, or all in. Okay, so first thing we'll see here is that out of position, PIO is only wanting to bet 20%, which again is a really good indicator that going from, instead of c-betting this 20%, just taking our whole range and checking it is likely going to be a nice strategy. especially if you're against a player who might just way overstab when you start checking very frequently on this board. It's going to allow you to, when you check call, he's going to get to the turn with a much weaker range than he might normally. Or also when you check raise, you're dropping the hammer on a lot of extra bluffs that shouldn't be in there to begin with. So against those type of players, checking your whole range is going to be pretty nice. So as we can see here, though, aces is almost 100% check if we are going to take the PIO strategy. We'll talk about this a little bit. Choosing to put in more money here with hands that are strong on this board, but definitely need a little more protection. And as we usually see, favoring a little bit more hands that have the back door, the heart. Here, they're all about the same. Here, actually not favoring the heart, favoring the ones that don't have the heart. So that's interesting. This is actually kind of the first time that I've seen that, where it's favoring the ones that don't have the heart. So cool. This is definitely something that's a little bit different. And I guess the reason why it's choosing to be so mixed here and not, all the eights that are betting have, the gut shot to a really strong straight. So I'm guessing that's why we're being really mixed here. Wanting to do a lot of check calling with strong flush draws and stuff, so we can have those flushes in the check call line and with the back doors, and also wanting to probably check raise those at some frequency as well. And what else? The 5x, again, a spot where we're just really mixing with all the hands. Trying to think here of why we're favoring the hands that don't have a heart a little bit more. And my guess is that when we have a heart in our hand, he's probably just slightly more likely to check back for us. And the hands that have a heart need a little bit less protection because we're, blocking some of the high equity hands in his range. And that's probably the biggest thing, is I guess these hands just need a little bit less protection than the hands that don't have a heart. That's probably the most important takeaway there. Okay, so we check, and you can see if we do check, he's supposed to be betting a really high frequency here. And let's check after we check, he does start to have a range advantage now, which is something that's important to note. Even though we've still checked the majority of our range, having, again, like I was saying, all these hands down here, more opportunities to make straights, more straights in his range, more two pairs in his range, things like that. He's definitely able to bet quite a bit. So he bets, and now we just start folding a bunch, doing some aggressive check raising, and I think you're going to see that we're finding some mixes here with flush draws, throwing in some backdoor flush draws that also have a gut shot or some sort of backdoor, other backdoor equity. Here we have a pair. So mixing in a lot of flush draws, straight draws here. The only straight combo that we can have pretty much, the 8-5 suited. I'm not seeing anything too surprising here. These are ones that we know that we want to check raise at a high frequency that has the heart. This has the straight as well, so we don't necessarily have to have a heart, but you can see that we, even the ace that doesn't have a heart, we want to have the 5 of hearts. If we don't have one of the hands as a heart, it looks like we pretty much always want to be check calling. Yeah, nothing that seems too surprising here. Let's look at some of the folds and see if... Well, let's start with our weakest call here. None of them really seem that difficult because we're going to have a pair or a straight draw or a bunch of backdoor equity. So I don't see anything that's really difficult here, and all our folds seem pretty obvious. I guess folding ace-jack with the jack backdoor flush draw, I think that would maybe be a call that I would actually never make here out of position. So the ace of diamonds, jack of hearts, and the ace of clubs, jack of hearts, we're supposed to defend with a little bit. I would probably always fold those, as well as the ace of spades, jack of hearts. But then I would be defending the ace of hearts, jack at a much higher frequency. So this one might be a little bit difficult to kind of hit these ratios, but everything else seems pretty straightforward, and I think that's something that you guys all probably understand at this point. So anyways, the other takeaway here is Like I said, the ace of hearts might check raise at some small frequency, but the other ones want to check call. I was pretty accurate about that, but the check raise frequency is very, very small. So definitely good to just be check calling a lot here with these type of hands. So we call. The turn was the 9 of diamonds. Always going to be checking. And he gets to continue to barrel at a very high frequency. And again, once we check call, because you saw how aggressively he was betting on the flop, even though he was still betting a lot of very strong hands, and we're having some trouble making, you know, as many straights as him and 2 pairs and things like that, because he was finding a ton of bluffs that didn't improve on this turn, and we were folding so much to his bet, you see that now our equity out of position has swapped. We're now ahead of him. But even though we're ahead of him, he's still going to be able to continue betting at a very high frequency at 50%, because he has that. Let's compare here. So this is the. So for us, we have 1 combo of straights, we'll say, and 2 combos of sets, just rounding up. So the majority of our range here is going to be over pairs and then draws of some kind. And when we go to him, he's got 40 combos of straights and 6 combos of sets. I mean, that's insane. So that's a big time problem for us, which is why we get to see him betting so much. And he's definitely going to want to focus a decent amount of his betting on things that block some of the straights or have flush draws. You can see that just giving up at a very high frequency with the ones that don't have the flush draws here. Still betting 2 pairs for value and protection on this board, even betting top pair with a gut shot. But you can see that 10-9 is quite a bit more valuable here than Jack-9 or even Queen-9, unless he has the flush draw, obviously. But yeah, he still just gets to bet a bunch. And also keep in mind that he's overbetting here as well. And again, we see us finding a lot of folds, doing 0 raising. We'll just say this is 0. And the calls, all of our pocket aces. We're actually starting to fold some of our kings here. We're starting to fold some of our queens here. Jacks are folding as well. And then as far as the overs, pretty obvious, only continue with flush draws. I don't think anything here is going to be too difficult. And as far as like the check raises here, I wouldn't even worry about it. It's 0.7 combos. It's pretty much never happening. So although it shows it on this board here, not something that I'm going to worry about at all. We call, and the river is the Jack of Diamonds. And it does have us donking some small percent of the time here. Again, not something I'm going to worry about too much. I think the reason being is, like, if we have ace king of diamonds, I think the donking range is kind of getting built around this hand specifically. Because if we have the ace king of diamonds, we block all of his ace high flush draws that could bet. We block all of his king high flush draws that could value bet, which is a lot of potential value bet combos. We also block all of his ace high, ace of diamonds X combos that could bluff, and his king at diamonds X combos that can bluff. So the donk range, I think, is getting built around this specific, I don't know, whatever small fraction of combos that we have of that. And then we're just matching in some other thin value bets, some other value bets along with that, and then just finding a ton of bluffs, with some of this other stuff here. And some of these really weak hands that we would just probably be check folding mostly otherwise. So anyways, we do check. And you can see here, kudos to him. I don't know what hand he had here, obviously, but the one thing to note is that he used exactly pot. And when you give the option between pot and all in, PIO only uses pot. So it would be interesting to see if he had like a hand that maybe some people would have gone all in with or something, but PIO's opted to do pot instead. Because from my perspective, I would have had some shoves on this run out. I would have had some ace of diamonds X shoves, matched in some, or ace high flush shoves, some king high flush shoves, and then also matched in some ace of diamonds X bluffs and some king of diamonds X bluffs. And it looks like even with those, we're only wanting to use the pot size option. And it's pretty much just all flushes and, you know, matching some bluffs. Let's see. He can value bet a little bit with straights that doesn't have a flush. A little bit more with the strongest straight here. But yeah. Let's see, 7-6. So yeah. Pocket sevens, none of the sets are even betting. So yeah, a straight or a flush, pot, and so one of the reasons that he can just bet pot with his ace high flushes is keeping in mind that against PIO, PIO is actually going to have a pretty aggressive check raising range on this river. And so with his ace high flushes and his king high flushes, he's still able to get the money all in. Against a more passive player who's not going to be finding a lot of check raises here, I think we would want to develop that overbet shoving strategy on the turn and just force them to call with a bunch of stuff. So definitely want to know your opponent here. Obviously, if I'm able to turn the ace of diamonds X hand into a bluff, like I did here, and which it seems that it's like a break-even bluff. I had the ace of diamonds, ace of spades, so we're basically we're losing $1 here in a $1,000 pot, so it's a break-even bluff. Yeah, against an aggressive opponent like me, who's able to maybe find more of these bluffs and also go for more of these check raise value bets. With like I would have definitely been able to check raise easily any of the queen high flushes, and we can't have the jack high flush, so yeah, I would have been check raising very similar to PIO here. Would have not check raised these sets, the set of sevens, but I would have, like, let's say he bet pot with a king high flush and I check raised the queen high flush, he's still getting that value. And I'm still finding a lot of these. Again, let's keep in mind that we don't have a lot of these. If I did have like ace king that had the ace of diamonds or something, or that got here, I would have definitely been check raising that. But that's a very low frequency get to the river for me. So with that in mind, where am I finding my bluffs here on this river? It would have to be like pocket aces. Pocket kings with a diamond also makes sense. Do we check shove? Would I have check shove pocket queens with a diamond? Probably not. I would have probably mostly just folded the pocket queens, and I might have actually favored the eights, so now we can block some of the straights and still are blocking some of the flushes. It looks like PIO, -5. Much worse to jam these. I guess it's not blocking enough of the flush combos for it to be worth it. So I might have made a mistake here because I might have chosen some of these weaker flush blockers, weaker pair as well. And also blocking some straights, I might have chosen those to jam. So I would have made a little bit of a mistake here. It looks like, I don't know if it's exactly, I think it's turning these sets into bluffs. So this is really interesting because although it looks like PIO's check raising very aggressively, it's very value oriented, and my range would have been the same as well. So he should be folding some pretty strong hands once we check shove, and we have to actually really be forcing ourselves to check jam with these hands to match the value range that we're jamming with, which is ace king and queen high flushes. Otherwise, we're not gonna have any bluffs. So definitely a good check shove on our part. And I think I might have made a mistake by not finding a check shove frequency here with the queens. Okay, so that was the rundown for that hand. Don't get to see what he had, but I'm sure he played it well. I think we played this hand as good as we could have played it, so I'm pretty happy with that one. This might be the first time for these review series where I showed a hand that I think I played basically the same exact way PIO would have played it. A lot of them showed little mistakes in my ranges and things like that, so kind of nice to give myself a little pat on the back for that one. But anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed this series. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, please leave them in the comments down below. Or you can also come check out my Twitch streaming 5 days a week, and let me know if you have anything that you want to see in future YouTube videos, or questions, comments, whatever. Definitely happy to hear from you guys. And with that being said, until next time, good luck at the tables and have a good one, guys.